Formula 1 is boring, MotoGP is fun. How many times we heard that? How many times we thought that? Well, actually it's subjective, because some people prefer car racing, some others motorcycle racing. However, there is a kernel of truth in this sentence, because usually in Formula 1 you see much less overtakings than in MotoGP racing. Exciting Formula 1 races are rare, while exciting last live fights in MotoGP are more common. So in general, we can say that motorcycles are more spectacular than cars. And so the question is, why do we see more overtakes with bikes than cars? Well, the reasons are solely technical. And having I raced more than 150 races so far with cars and bikes, and having touched the two worlds with my hands, I can tell you precisely why this is happening. And that is precisely what I'm going to tell you in this video. The first reason concerns the size. Size doesn't matter! How many times you heard that? It usually refers about something else. Sad story. Whatever, in racing, they actually matter a lot. Because one of the reasons behind the greater number of overtakes in motorcycle racing lies precisely in its size. Formula 1 and MotoGP tracks are the same width, but the vehicle size are much different. A Formula 1 car is 2 meters wide and more than 5 long, while a MotoGP is 65 centimeters wide and just 2 meters long. And what does this entail? It implies that with a motorcycle, being the bike much smaller, you can do more overtaking for the following reasons. First of all, the motorcycle is much narrower, so you can overtake in much smaller spaces. With the car, on the other hand, being it much wider, if you are in front and you are defending yourself, sometimes you just have to cover the inside, because the car is so big that you are actually blocking all the way and the car behind has nowhere to pass. The second reason about the size is a more technical one. Because when you're driving or riding on track, there is only one ideal line. That one is the line that makes you go faster. Any other line is just slower. So if you want to overtake the vehicle in front of you, usually under braking, if that vehicle is doing the ideal line, you are forced to do a wrong line. Because the other one is not transparent, so you cannot pass through it. So, for example, if you're driving a car and you want to overtake in the inside in the braking, you have to go for a very wrong and slow line, forcing you to be much slower. With the motorcycle, on the other hand, being it much narrower, you can overtake in the inside by remaining pretty close to the ideal line, and therefore not losing too much time even if you are overtaking. And I'm telling you by my experience with the motorcycles, when I was riding in free practice with the Pro, they used to overtake me so close that I had to go back to the pit lane and change my underwear. Wow. Okay, but so if we want more overtaking, we just have to do smaller Formula 1 cars, right? I mean, smaller cars, more overtakes. Is there any other example in the real world? Well, actually, yes. The Legend Cars Racing, the cars that I used to race. They were so small that they were closer to a MotoGP than a Formula 1 car. And actually, racing was crazy. Overtakes in every corner, 5 wide under braking. Got it! Let's just make Formula 1 cars smaller and we will get more overtakes, right? Well, actually, no. Because the old 2000 Formula 1 cars were much smaller than nowadays Formula 1 cars, but there were less overtakes than nowadays. So the main reason is not the size, because there is one more complex reason, which is the aerodynamics. This is the biggest reason of all when we compare Formula 1 and MotoGP racing. It is not the only one, though, about the vehicle dynamics, which we will see in a few minutes. Now, let's stay in the aerodynamics, more specifically on the aerodynamic load. Formula 1 cars have aerodynamic load, while MotoGP don't. Wait a second, they actually do. Oh my god, they do! They've put wings in MotoGP bikes, but they are much more inferior than the Formula 1 ones. Formula 1 cars, with their floors, their wings and other body shapes, are capable to generate monstrous downforce. Basically, when the car moves forwards and hits the air, it uses that air to be squashed downwards. By squeezing downwards, the tires are pushed towards the ground, and so the tires bite the asphalt and makes the car capable of braking more and cornering faster. They actually do like airplanes, but in reverse. Airplanes use the air to go up in the air, while Formula 1 cars use the air to keep them stuck on the ground. This thing in motorcycles doesn't exist. until a few years ago, when they started introducing wings in MotoGP. But still, the two things are not remotely comparable, because a Formula 1 car at 250 kilometers an hour generates 2,500 kilograms of downforce, while a MotoGP bike at the same speed only 50 kilograms. In MotoGP, therefore, the value of the aerodynamic load is 1/4 of the combined weight of the bike and the rider, while on a Formula 1 car is 4 times the combined weight of the car and the driver. Do you understand why aerodynamics in MotoGP matter very little compared to Formula 1? This is demonstrated by the fact that MotoGP with wings have gained just a little on the lap time. For example, in Mugello, if we take the pole position of Pedrosa in 2013, it was 1:47, while Bagnaia pole position in 2023 with the wings was 1:46. They gained just 1 second. While if you take a Formula car and get rid of the wings and the downforce, they will lap more than 30 seconds per lap slower. You get it, right? Good to know. That's all interesting, but what does this stuff has to do with overtaking? Well, we are getting there. For this downforce advantage to work, you need to have air coming at you, right? And what happens when you have another car in front of you? It happens that that car is getting all the air and getting all the downforce. But behind it, it's generating a lot of turbulences, which hit your car, which is behind, and therefore ruins your aerodynamics. So you find out that if you're behind, you have less downforce, and so you can't make corners as quickly as the car in front. But this doesn't end here, because having less downforce, it means that the tire doesn't bite the asphalt enough, and so it wears and overheats. But this is not the end of it yet, because every car behind have the exhausts, which are constantly shooting hot air. And so all that hot air is coming at you, making your tires, brakes and engine temperature go up. I can remember this very clearly with the motorcycles, because I remember that when I was exiting a corner behind another bike, that bike in front was shooting such a hot air that my suit was burning. So if you are behind with a Formula 1 car, you're going slower and you're consuming the car more. Usually we say that the car behind is getting dirty air from the car in front. So if you don't want to destroy the tires, either you overtake the car immediately or you have to lift and take space, which completely kills every chance of battling. Okay, but what about motorcycles? All of this happens much less because the downforce in MotoGP is much less important than Formula 1. Well, in recent years, even MotoGP bikes started to suffer from the dirty air of the bike in front, but mainly it depends on the Michelin front tire, because that tire is already suffering from the downforce that the new wings brought, and so it tends to overheat, and this overheating gets worse when you get the dirty air from the bike in front. But with the motorcycle, it's much easier to get fresh air. Being the bike much smaller, you just have to move a little bit on the straight, and you get clean air. So, because of the aerodynamics, staying behind with the Formula 1 car sucks. But not always. Yeah, because all that annoying turbulence that the car in front is generating, that makes braking and cornering horrible, is actually very helpful on the straight. Yeah, because when you're going fast on the straight, the air actually brakes you. But if there is a car in front which is braking that air, if you're following, you're finding less resistance, and therefore you can go faster on the straight. That's what we used to call taking the slipstream. And this phenomenon is both true with motorcycles and cars. So this chart therefore makes you understand why overtaking with cars is hard because of the aerodynamics. In corners, with Formula 1 cars, the aerodynamics disadvantage you so much if you are behind, while in MotoGP the disadvantage is very small. On the straight, the slipstream is very powerful, so it gives you an advantage with cars, but you have lost so much on the corners that you cannot recover. In MotoGP, you have the same advantage, but you didn't lose time on the corners. And this is the main reason why they introduced DRS in Formula 1. If you don't know what it is, the DRS is a moving wing installed on the rear wing, which Formula 1 drivers can activate in order to overtake. Only if you are behind, only if you are less than 1 second from car in front, and only in some specific parts of the track. With a switch on the steering wheel, you can move the rear wing, reducing the aerodynamic drag on the straight and making the car go faster. The idea behind the DRS is to compensate the disadvantage that you got in the previous corner, because of the aerodynamics. You can understand that it's a workaround, okay? It's not a solution, but it works, and so it really increased the number of overtakes in Formula 1. Wow. So at this point, we have the secret of making Formula 1 more entertaining. If we make smaller cars and get rid of the aerodynamics, we will get much better racing, right? Exactly. But at that point, those cars would not be any more Formula 1 cars. They would be legend cars, skate barbers, they will lose their appeal, and moreover, they will be very slow. So how can we solve this issue? Well, it was precisely to solve this issue that in 2022 they introduced the ground effects regulations. Because until 2021, the aerodynamic load was achieved mainly with wings and the diffuser, while the whole bottom of the car was just flat. Now, from 2022, the new regulations allow Formula 1 cars to make use of the ground effect. Well, I have to make a technical note, because the ground effect was always there, because it's a term that refers to the car being sucked to the ground. But the difference is that these new cars from 2022 can use the Venturi channels, which are three-dimensional channels on the bottom of the car that make it much more powerful, the ground effect that sucks the car to the ground. The wings, on the other hand, are always there, but they generate less downforce than before, and they are designed to reduce the dirty air. So how did this increase the overtakes? Because for a whole set of technical reasons that I'm not going to list in here, but I'll make one example, which is that with this new design, the dirty air is shot up in the air instead of behind, and the ground effect of the Venturi channel suffers less from the dirty air. Well, all these new technical regulations have improved racing. Following a car in the corner is much easier, and therefore you can stay closer. Yet, we are still far from motorcycles. Because if we look at this chart, overtaking is still difficult. Why? Because there is still one less technical reason that makes overtaking with cars more difficult. A technical reason which is hard to see, which you can clearly understand if you've driven both. Now, before talking about it, are you enjoying this video? If you do, please let me know below by leaving a like, by subscribing to the channel, because if you like it, I'm going to post more of this kind of videos. Now, the last reason has to do with the dynamic of the vehicle. There is one very special anecdote that I want to tell you. It's a story that a very important person in the Formula 1 world told me during a Formula 1 Grand Prix in the paddock about a driver-rider who was competing in both worlds. I don't want to tell you the names, not because it's a secret, but because I couldn't find this anecdote anywhere on the web. And so, being it a confidential talk, I'm just not sure whether I can or not tell you who is this story about, but whatever. This driver-rider one day told to this person something like, I prefer motorcycle racing because, man, in the car, if you have to brake 100 meters from the corner, you have to brake 100 meters from the corner. Because if you brake at 95, you miss the corner. While if you brake at 105, you're just too slow. And so, how do you overtake? With motorcycles, on the other hand, you can brake 5 or 10 meters later. You take a bit of a risk, but you can make the corner and make the overtake. So this is the essence of why you see less overtaking in cars compared to motorcycles. I'll explain you technically. The general rule of going fast on track, we can say that is, you have to brake as late and as hard as possible, and you have to accelerate as hard and as early as possible, okay? So in a car, the concept is simple. You brake hard. Okay, but what happens if you brake too hard? Well, the wheel locks up and slips on the asphalt. Oh my gosh. And then, what happens? Well, if you exaggerate, you might ruin the tire, but in most cases, you just miss the corner a bit and lose a couple of tenths of a second. That's it. And also, if you brake too hard and don't look up, maybe you just miss the corner and lose a couple of tenths of a second. Okay, but what about motorcycles? What happens when you lock the front wheel? Oh, I remember that. That was me. Okay, and what happens if you brake too much? Okay, gosh. And what happens if you enter a corner too fast? Guys, do you understand why I always say that motorcycle racing is much harder than car racing? In the car, if you exaggerate the braking, very often nothing happens. While if you do it with the motorcycles, you usually crash, you destroy the bike, and sometimes you break your bones. This is fundamental. Why? In the car, because it's easy to get to the limit of braking, especially with nowadays GT cars which have the ABS. Every driver is always braking at the limit. And so if the car in the front is braking at the limit, how can you brake more than the limit? It's just impossible. Because if you try to do more, you just overdo it and miss the corner. In motorcycles, on the other hand, you can't brake to the limit in every single corner, because that way you're not gonna finish the race. Instead, you always want to keep a bit of margin, you sacrifice the braking, you prefer the cornering speed, and that way you find a good pace. So, if you want to do the braking of your life on the last lap for the fight of the World Championship, you can do it. You take a risk of not finishing the race, but if you make it, you win. But this is not the end of the story, because there is one other fact. And in order to explain it to you, I'm going to show you myself on the same track, on the same braking, with two different vehicles. A motorbike, Yamaha R1, and a car, a GP3 car, which is the old version of the Formula 3 cars that nowadays are racing in the Formula 1 World Championship. We get to the braking at the same speed, 275 kilometers an hour. This is where I brake with the bike, 220 meters, and this is where I brake with the car, 90 meters. This is all. Braking a motorcycle is so long that you have all the time and all the space to try and brake more and do the overtake. While braking with cars is so short in terms of time and space that if you want to try and overtake, you have to do a kamikaze maneuver. So you don't overtake. But wait. This is a lie. I know, this is what you're thinking. Because in Formula 1, we've seen so many dive bombs of people braking 20 meters later and doing the corner. So what I just said is a lie? No, because most of the time you're seeing dive bombs in Formula 1 with drivers succeeding in the overtake, most of the times it's happening that either you're seeing two different cars or you're seeing two cars with different tires and therefore different braking power, or one of them is having technical problems, like Carlos Sainz on Charles Leclerc in Bahrain in 2024, where Leclerc was having braking problems. So necessarily they have a different braking limits, because if they have the same braking limits, you can gain 5 meters, not 30. Finally, and this is one last thing that makes me love motorcycle racing so much, is that with cars there is no room for creativity. Or rather, if we're talking about old-fashioned cars, you can invent something crazy like Piquet in Hungary in 1986. Or with very raw cars like Naska, you can do crazy overtakes like the one I did in Zolder last year, overtaking two cars holding the inside on the wet with the car sideways because you have the clutch, the A shifter. But with a Formula 1 car, where in the braking you just have to push a pedal and push some switches, what can you invent? Nothing. In motorcycles, on the other hand, you can. You can put it sideways, you can use the rear brake, you can put your leg out. We have also seen some riders that in a desperate braking pulled both legs out and in the end they succeeded. And that is what I refer when I talk about creativity. So my friends, these were the reasons why in Formula 1 we see less overtakings than in MotoGP. If you like this video, leave a like and subscribe, and see you in some next racing videos. Bye bye!